Good morning, all, and welcome to the sixth and final panel of the Center for Social Concerns 2021 Catholic Social Tradition Conference. My name is Kelly Reagan, and I'm a research associate in Catholic social teaching here at the Center for Social Concerns. Throughout our conversations this week, we've learned from an impressive array of academics, practitioners, religious, and community members about key topics pertaining to justice in our world. Racial justice, a global vision of justice, spreading the good news of the gospel, justice in the world of work, and justice at home in the church. I'm thrilled to welcome each of you today as we explore our sixth and final topic, one that grows increasingly urgent as we speak, the topic of environmental justice. In the 1971 document titled Justice in the World, the document upon which this conference is based, the World Synod of Catholic bishops charged themselves, the faithful and all people of goodwill, to cultivate a deep, actionable concern for the flourishing and protection of our shared earth. In paragraph 8, they write, "The small and delicate biosphere of the whole complex of life on earth is not infinite, but on the contrary must be saved and preserved as a unique patrimony belonging to all human beings." Here we encounter our first call, the call of stewardship. In another document, the 1986 document, Economic Justice for All, the bishops write that the justice of a community is measured by its treatment of the powerless in society, most often described as the widow, the orphan, the poor, and the stranger in the land. What these groups of people have in common is their vulnerability and lack of power. They are often alone and have no protector or advocate. Today, we might consider our natural environment in this light. We might say that the justice of a community is measured by its treatment of the vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, the poor, the earth. Pope Francis, in his 2010 encyclical Laudato Si, profoundly expands this idea. Today, facing the joint crises of climate change and the global pandemic, the climate crisis has emerged at the forefront of human concern. And what exactly do we mean by the phrase justice for the earth? How can we best enact justice for the earth, from our own consumption habits to international policy? This morning, or at least morning here in the US, we have an exceptional lineup of panelists to discuss these and other questions. Before I begin with brief introductions, a few words about the structure of our panel. I will ask each of our panelists to provide 10 to 15 minutes of remarks. Following our final panelist, we will open the floor for questions and answers. Please note the Q&A function at the bottom of this screen. If you have a general question or a question for a specific panelist, please submit it in the Q&A box below. We will try our best to thoughtfully answer as many questions as we can before we conclude promptly at 12:15. And because this is a virtual conference, I ask again for your patience as we work through any technical glitches. And now our esteemed panelists. Live from Israel, Yuri Shanas, our first panelist, is the CEO and founder of TIME, which stands for This Is My Earth. TIME is an international environmental organization that focuses on education and activism. It provides a global democratic platform to advance the effort to preserve biodiversity. Its tools educate members about the various biodiversity hotspots that require urgent international attention. Yuri holds his PhD in zoology from Tel Aviv University. And because of his observance of Passover, Yuri may have to leave our panel early, but we are very pleased to have him with us for as long as he is able. Our second panelist, Rabbi Jonathan Nariel, is the founder and director of the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, an organization that works to connect religion and ecology and that mobilizes faith communities across Africa, the Middle East, North America, and Europe to take action for environmental justice. Rabbi Jonathan received his bachelor's and master's degrees at Stanford University, and he was ordained in Israel. Because of his observance of Passover, Rabbi Jonathan will be unable to join us live today, but we have a video of his remarks, which we will show during our session. Our third panelist, Margie File, holds a joint appointment in the Theology Department and the Center for Social Concerns here at the University of Notre Dame. She is also a faculty fellow of the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies. Margie's research expertise includes Catholic social teaching, racial justice, nonviolence, and ecological ethics. She is also a co-founder and resident of the St. Peter Claver Catholic Worker Community here in South Bend, Indiana. Our final panelist, Father Emmanuel Katongole, is a professor of theology and peace studies here at Notre Dame. He holds a joint appointment with the Keough School of Global Affairs and was formerly an associate professor of theology and world Christianity at Duke University, where he co-founded the Duke Center for Reconciliation. Father Emmanuel is also a co-founder of the Bethany Land Institute, a rural farm in Uganda that works to promote a culture of sustainability in agriculture and education. Yuri, Margie, Father Emmanuel, we are so grateful to have you all with us today. And Yuri, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Okay, hello. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kelly, and thank you everyone for inviting me. And let me start with sharing my screen and we can begin. So yeah, I'm from the University of Haifa and the Oranim campus, and I would like to begin with the bad news maybe. And the bad news are that we lose a forest the size of a football field almost every second. And in fact, I mean, this is almost incomprehensible to think about that, about this destruction that we are actually doing ourselves. Humans are actually, this is what we do now. And we practically, scientists talk today about the sixth mass extinction. And we already know that we lost between, it's not, this slide talks about 60% of animal population in the last 50 years, but we know already that it's more than 60%. And I've been teaching these numbers, these figures to my students. I teach biology and conservation biology at the university. And I'm trying to give them both knowledge and both awareness. But I started to think, is it enough? Is preaching, and what I'm doing in class, it's actually preaching. And I started to think some years ago, is preaching enough? Is it really doing what I expect it to do? And to help me with that, I started to think about what is called the handicap principle, postulated by the late Professor Amos Zehavi. And what Professor Amos Zehavi used to say is that a message will become reliable when it bears a cost. And one of the examples that I'm as a biologist is really like and often brings about is the peacock example. Peacocks have developed apparently very huge tails just to show off that they are capable of bearing such a cost, such a huge tail, and still evade predators. And this is how they show off their how strong they are. And this is what we actually say it's a handicap. It's a handicap to bear such a long tail, and by showing it off, you actually show a very reliable message that you are strong. And I start to think, what about conservation? What about protecting the earth? And so I said, so for many years, as I said, I've been teaching, and then I started to think, is there anything that I personally can do about it? Is it possible for me to show my students and to show the world maybe that I'm really sincere in what I'm talking about, that I'm really sincere and I really care about the earth? And of course, when you start to think about it, okay, what I would like to do, I would like to hug all the trees. I would like to save all the nature areas around the world, all the natural areas. I would like to stop climate change, to cut off completely greenhouse gases discharges. But then, as a scientist, I said, okay, we have to start from somewhere. And this somewhere that I found out as a very good place to start and working towards what I'm preaching is those places that are called biodiversity hotspots. Now, biodiversity hotspots are places in the world, are biogeographic regions that have both a significant a reservoir of biodiversity and that it is threatened. And we are talking not about all the land mass around the world or all the water bodies. We're talking about just about 2.3% of the land surface of the planet. These are the places that we actually, scientists already said that we need to focus on. So it's not, so now my mission begin to make sense, because if I want to start from somewhere, if I want to start to save the earth, I want to start to do something for the earth, I have this map, and I know already that it's not all the earth, it's only 2.3%. But then I realized something really really interesting. More than 50% of these hotspots areas are in private ownership. So I told myself, okay, this is the handicap I was looking for. I can actually go and buy them. Now, of course, I would not buy them with my salary, and I don't think there is one person in the world, even the richest person in the world, that can actually go, and maybe there is one or two, I'm not sure, but I don't think there are people that I can really go and buy these places. But maybe if we all get together, we can do that. And this is exactly the point when I started to think about forming a new organization or a new tool. Maybe it's not an organization, it's a tool that enable us to go and really do something for the earth. And I formed this organization that we call TIME, which is an acronym for This Is My Earth, as Kelly said. And the mission is to preserve lands that are home to unique ecosystem and that are threatened by our activities, by human activities. But I wanted it to be special. I wanted to make it something that hasn't been done before, because this mission already, we know that people already started doing that. We wanted to bring this idea to the entire community of the Earth citizens, and to enable every person on the planet to help rescue habitat destruction by purchasing land in biodiversity hotspot and joining a democratic, interactive, and educating organization. How do we do that? How do we do that? So first we said we make it affordable. Every person in the world can become a member by only $1 a year. $1 a year, you become a member of this international organization. But not only that, we promise you that 100% of your money will go into purchasing and saving those biodiversity hotspots. And by that, we mean we take no overhead. We are all volunteers, and all the money that go into the organization is transparent, and we become very reliable. But moreover, we wanted it to make it a democratic organization. And that means by becoming a member, we enable our members to vote on our website where they want us to go and purchase the next land in the world. So we are affordable, we are transparent, we are reliable, and we are democratic. To make it happen, we needed lots of volunteers. So first, we established a scientific committee from scientists from all over the world, at least one from each continent. And we form a board also from all over the world. They are all volunteers. Everybody is volunteering, and lots of volunteers from all over the world. This is what we all try to do. We try to raise as much money as possible by crowdfunding, and direct it completely, 100% of it, to purchasing and saving those biodiversity hotspots and turning them into conservation areas. Now, we also wanted to go into education, because we found out that this is a wonderful tool for educating the next generation. We bring this idea to class, and as you see here on the right, We have places where we call people to vote, and we bring it as a practice to classes where the students or the kids, they need to debate which place they want to vote for. And by debating, they also learn a lot about these areas and about the challenges in this area, and about conservation and geography and maybe political science. Lots of issues go into this debate, depending how much time you want to spend on it. And in fact, when I started to teach conservation biology, I thought first I want to give my students a knowledge and eventually want to raise their awareness until to make them act and help everybody else, I mean, all the others, to help to save as much as possible from the earth. But with time, we turn this pyramid upside down, and we first ask them to act. Let's go and act. Let's go and save these places. And by this act that they need to decide right now where they want us to go and purchase the next land, they eventually absorb the knowledge. And this is what we do. We bring it to classes. They start with learning in couples sometimes this project. Then they turn into debate in class, and eventually they go out of the class and they try to make the awareness to the community and to maybe also raise some money to become a member and vote. So the education part of time is about values, and it's about nature, and it's social sciences and decision making and geography and natural sciences. All these issues go into the education system when we bring it into class. And in fact, we've been seeing teachers adopting our curriculum from elementary school to university. And it's really fun to see what students say about it. For example, here I learn about myself that I can set up a goal and achieve it, or the last one, after I voted on the Time website, I truly felt like I changed something. We really give them an opportunity to make a change and to become part of the solution. And we have some achievements. We've been able to purchase lands from the beginning, 2016, in Peru, and then in Colombia and Belize, and now we raised enough money. Again, money that we raise from all over the world, from kids, from adults, in Brazil and Kenya. And for example, this is the first land that we purchased in Peru, and this is the yellow-tailed woolly monkey, a critically endangered species that only 250 individuals were left in the world from, and we've been able to help save this species. And for example, this is another story here of success in Belize, where we've been able to save part of an atoll of a coral reef. Again, together with kids from all over the world, we managed to purchase and save this wonderful world. So when we talk about justice for the earth, I believe that justice for the earth really begins in giving to the world, and also putting some handicap on yourself by giving, by really giving something from yourself, something that might be important for you, and you show that you really care for the earth. So time is about education, it's about conservation, it's about democracy, and I hope that you all join us and help us together. I think together we can do a lot and actually save the world. Thank you. I'm done.
Many thanks, Yuri. Would you mind? There we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Yuri, that was very powerful. I especially liked the message that a message is reliable when it starts to bear a cost. And I think that that's a really important insight, especially for the climate crisis. And also the importance of taking action. And I see that so much in time and in your organization. So thank you so much for your work.
Thank you.
And for your input.
Thanks.
And now we will hear from Rabbi Yonatan Nariel. He is recorded from Jerusalem. So here are his remarks.
I'm pleased to be here with you today. I'm here from Jerusalem, and I'm excited to share with you a short teaching from the Jewish perspective that relates to the topic of justice in our world. In the book of Deuteronomy, it states, "Justice, justice you shall pursue." And the topic of ecological justice is a deep one that relates to the future of our people and all species on this planet. Here you can see in the slides is a midrash, a Jewish teaching from about 1800 years ago from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And he gives an example of people who were sitting in a boat. One of them took a borer and began drilling a hole in the floor of the boat beneath him. His friend said to him, "What are you sitting and doing to the boat?" He replied to them, "What does it matter to you? Am I not boring beneath myself?" They said to him, "Your actions are of concern to us because the waters are rising through that hole and flooding the entire boat." This teaching is graphically depicted here, that some people thought that maybe they would make it out without being harmed. This comic describes it a little bit differently, that we're all in this boat together. What you're doing affects us too. And the person at the end of the day says, "By golly, you're right." This teaching is based on verses from the book of Job, that Job said, "Even if I have erred, my error lodges within me." Job's friend said to him in response, for he adds rebellion to his error among us. He spoke, meaning you are bringing punishment among us for your sins. And the question is, why is this person drilling underneath their own seat? Now, it's possible to think the person is psychotic or crazy, but think to yourself for a moment, can you think of a rational reason for why this person did this? Maybe they wanted to fish because they were hungry. Or maybe they wanted to cool down their feet because their feet were hot. Or perhaps they wanted to drink some fresh water because they were thirsty. Another possibility is they were trying to drill for oil or gas. Or maybe they wanted to harvest seaweed to go with the fish that they caught because they brought rice on board the ship. Or perhaps they had to use the bathroom. These are all rational reasons for why a person would drill underneath their own seat. Now, a second question that I'll raise in relating to this question of justice in our world is what accounts for the disregard of other people's welfare? They were doing something that was unjust. They were causing harm to other people, causing damage, and yet they proceeded to do the act. So perhaps they thought a small hole won't cause real damage. They're just doing a small action. Or maybe they can't think of anything beyond their immediate need. They have to drink now. They have to eat. They have to go to the bathroom. These are all immediate needs that they need to fulfill in the present moment. Or maybe they think the problem is long-term. If the ship sinks, it won't happen for a long time, but by the time it happens, they will be off the ship. Now, a third question that I'll pose, what can the people on the ship do to convince this person to change his or her behavior, short of throwing the person overboard or tying up the person? So they can meet the person's needs in a way that doesn't involve drilling. They could give the person food if they're hungry. Or they could explain that the person's action will harm themselves too. Or perhaps they could tell the person that their action impacts other people. What they're doing has an effect on others, and they should be concerned about other people on the ship. So those are a few aspects of the ship and one metaphor for ecological sustainability on a ship, of thinking about other people. I want to briefly share with you about a second ship, Noah's Ark, which in my mind is a Bible-based teaching for justice in our world. Because at the end of the day, Noah and his family saved all humanity on the ark. Now, why didn't Noah go fishing? Well, he only had 2 worms, and if he used them for fishing, there wouldn't be any worms left. Where did he keep his bees? Well, we'll get to those questions another time. What did the generation of Noah's generation do to trigger God to destroy almost all life on earth? In other words, how is it possible that this is the only case in the Bible where God decides to destroy all of humanity and essentially all other living species except for the sea life? So there's a midrash, another teaching from the Jewish oral tradition about stealing peanuts at the market, and that one person would come to a market and would steal 1 peanut. They would do an unjust act, but the police officer who was called couldn't do anything about it because the justice system couldn't respond to small acts of injustice. And therefore, God destroyed the entire world based on people doing small acts of injustice. Small acts matter, and that's true in our times from an ecological perspective. If we do small acts that are destructive to the planet, then in the aggregate, they add up. That's what's causing climate change. That's what's causing biodiversity loss. That's what's causing plastic in the ocean. It's ecological injustice at the smallest level, and that's why the individual level matter. The individuals matter. What we do makes a difference. So I want to briefly share about a 3rd ship. This is Jonah and the repentance of Nineveh. What animal has the largest brain? It's a sperm whale. And Jonah, as you might be familiar with the story, God told him to bring a prophecy to the people of Nineveh and to go and to tell the people of Nineveh that they needed to repent. And if not, God would destroy them. So Jonah didn't want to do the prophecy. So he fled on a ship, and God brought a storm. The sailors threw him overboard. He ended up in the belly of a whale, which actually has the largest brain. And then he decided to do his mission, his prophecy, went to the people of Nineveh, and he prophesied to them. And why did they change their behavior? So the Midrash, the Jewish oral tradition, says that Pharaoh survived the splitting of the sea and became the king of Nineveh. And he repented and caused Nineveh, the capital of Assyria in modern-day Iraq, to change course. And that's a profound teaching about how we're living in a time where we need to change course. If we don't change course, then we're going to face much more significant ecological impacts than we're currently facing. And Pharaoh is an example of someone who realized that if you mess with God and you mess with God's creation, then ultimately there are consequences for that. Now, a 4th example, a 4th ship, is that of the Titanic. And you're all familiar with the story. It had an equivalent of 46,000 horsepower, so it's an apt metaphor for industrial society. And Captain Smith was warned about icebergs ahead, but the question is, why did he sail full steam ahead? He knew 11 ships warned him. And so first of all, he didn't realize that there would be so much ice there, because usually there wasn't in the North Atlantic. But actually, he ended up sailing into an ice pack that was 100 miles long and 100 miles wide. Now, he thought the ship was unsinkable because he believed that industrial society is stronger than nature. He also thought he'd be able to avoid a collision in time, but they only had 35 seconds after spotting the iceberg. And people on board assumed that he was taking care of them, but actually the philanthropists on the ship were putting on a dinner. And so 2 hours before they hit the iceberg, he went to sleep after that dinner. Here you can see it was sailing, then disaster struck, and now today it's on the bottom of the sea. So I'm actually going to end the screen share and just reflect for a few more minutes on this deeper question of ecological justice in our time. Justice for the earth, justice for all species, justice for the planet. I would say that the ecological crisis boils down to a deeper issue. It's really not about the birds and the bees or the trees and the toads. It's a crisis of how we live as spiritual beings in a physical reality. And therefore, the change that's required of us is to raise our level of spiritual awareness. I'm not talking about everyone, going into isolating themselves and meditating all day. Spirituality is also about caring for other people and other creatures. If in our current situation, many people are focused on mostly caring for themselves, in a reality of where we have expanded awareness, then we're going to care more about other people, and we're going to care more about all of God's creation, including all the 8 million species on this planet. And we'll hope to bring justice for them. We'll work to bring justice for them. That's, I believe, a key challenge in our time. And I believe that's the role of religion. So I founded an organization about 11 years ago called the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development. We're revealing the connection between religion and ecology and mobilizing people to act. This year, I published a book together with Rabbi Leo D called Eco Bible, which is an ecological commentary on the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses. Religion is the biggest NGO in the world. There's no greater force in the world that can work to help to re-steer the direction of humanity than religion. There's no captain of this ship. However, there are religious leaders, there are clergy, and there's the laity who can take action based on faith teachings. And that's why I believe that in order to steer the collective ship, we're going to need the full involvement of religion and people of faith. My organization has been working to help encourage clergy to teach and preach more on this topic, because amazingly enough, despite the ecological movement having existed for 50 years, most clergy in the world don't speak or teach on the topic of ecological sustainability. Most of them don't learn about it in seminary. It's sort of a non-topic for various reasons. And therefore, many clergy just decide this isn't part of religion as they see it. However, as Pope Francis makes clear in Laudato Si, the ecological crisis needs to be front and center in terms of our what he calls ecological conversion. That's a key conversion that we need to make in our times. And I believe that all people of faith can dig deep into their religious teachings to find this message of ecological justice within it. And I just want to finish with a short story that the Nobel laureate Toni Morrison told about a young boy who comes to an elder woman with a bird in his hands, and he says to the elder woman, "Can you tell me whether the bird in your hands is alive or dead?" And the woman thinks to herself, and she realizes that the boy is playing a trick on her, because if she says that the bird is dead, he'll open his hands and the bird will fly away, and she'll be wrong. And if she says that the bird is alive, he'll close his hands and crush the bird, and either way she'll be wrong. He's got her coming and going. So the woman thought to herself for a minute, and she said to the boy, "I don't know whether the bird in your hands is alive or dead. All I know is that the life of the bird is in your hands." And that's our situation today with ecological justice, justice in the world, justice for the earth. Each one of us has power. Each one of us can take responsibility, can make our lives more ecologically sustainable. And by infusing sustainability into our lives, I believe this will also help to connect us to God, because this is God's planet. Genesis chapter 2, verse 15 says, "And God placed the human being in the Garden of Eden to serve it and to conserve it." And so therefore, ecological living is part and parcel of a spiritual path. I want to bless us that this focus on justice and justice for the earth should help us to reveal a more sustainable path in order to enable the next generation to inherit a thriving, spiritually aware, and livable planet. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to Rabbi Yonatan for those impressive examples of the ships and also for the framing of the ecological crisis as a spiritual crisis. Next, we'll hear from Margie File. Margie, if I can pass the floor over to you.
Yes, thank you, Kelly, and Passover blessings to you, Yuri, and also to Rabbi Yonatan. What I have to share today will build very much on Rabbi Yonatan's emphasis on spiritual awareness. So it's a pleasure to be with all of you on this webinar today. And it's timely to remember the document Justice in the World, particularly its prophetic call to notice the warning signs of ecological injustice already evident in 1971. The bishops named the truth that models of industrial development used in Western societies of the Northern Hemisphere in particular simply were not replicable by all peoples on Earth. In our own time of rapidly accelerating climate crisis, Justice in the World's warning resounds all the more so in the context of the pandemic's stark reminders of our interconnection. I suggest to you today that both the climate crisis and the pandemic are signs of planetary impasse. In John of the Cross's understanding, a person experiencing a dark night of the soul and spirit finds that the usual practices, way of life, and routines simply do not work anymore. They have reached an impasse. The darkness of that experience, John of the Cross realized, is actually God's love purifying and drawing the person closer to God. Over the last 40 years, Carmelite sister Connie Fitzgerald has explored societal analogs to the dark night experience of impasse, like the climate crisis. And she asks, quote, "What if by chance our time in evolution is a dark night time, a time of crisis and transition that must be understood if it is to be part of learning a new vision and harmony for the human species and the planet," unquote. Understood as a time of impasse, the climate crisis invites us to go deeper interiorly and to notice how God's love is purifying and drawing us closer to God. Pope Francis writes in Laudato Si, quote, "The external deserts in the world are growing because the internal deserts have become so vast," unquote. He's actually citing Benedict XVI in that passage. The cry of the earth and the cry of the poor are one, and it is a cry within each one of us. The inward roots of the climate crisis are manifested in the devastation of societies, cultures, human interrelationship, ecosystems, and the integrity of planet Earth itself. 500-year floods occurring annually, all-consuming wildfires, intensifying hurricanes, and submerged homelands belie self-deceptive denial of climate emergency. Earth itself bears the wounds of impasse, even as its inhabitants cling to habits that accelerate global warming, speeding the death of all living things, as if all creation were not connected. Having lost a sense of our own creaturely subjectivity before God, we humans often fail to mourn the loss of life outside illusory bounds of self-interest. Victoria Towley Corpus, United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, has noted that Indigenous peoples, comprising less than 5% of the world's population, historically have contributed the least to climate change, but are among those most affected by its consequences. They are disproportionately represented among the world's marginalized, with few material resources to address the climate crisis. The Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw Indigenous people of Isle de Jean Charles, Louisiana, are recognized as the first climate refugees of the United States, grappling with the reality of relocation as their homeland steadily disappears into the sea. Likewise, the indigenous peoples of the Carteret Islands of Papua New Guinea are considered the world's first climate refugees. With global seas predicted to rise on average between 0.6 and 1.9 meters by the end of this century, the 2,700 inhabitants have already experienced the accompanying effects. From storm surge flooding to salinization of their soil, to coastal erosion on these 7 atolls with a maximum elevation of just 1.2 meters above sea level. Their land is expected to be uninhabitable by 2040. The experiences of the Carteret Islanders and the Biloxi Chictamaca Choctaw people portend the climate impasse facing all inhabitants of Earth. Fitzgerald's exploration of the dark night yields valuable insight into the contemplative process of educating human desire accordingly. At the point of impasse, Fitzgerald observes, Sophia Wisdom's gifts of faith, hope, and love offer the soul profound liberation precisely as every aspect of one's life and prayer rebels against it. Fitzgerald writes, quote, "Yet the only way the deprivation of the dark night will open into a radical change of consciousness and affectivity is by the acceptance of this contemplative posture or vision, whereby one actually passes over to the love perspective of divine wisdom," unquote. In the current climate crisis, the lack of mutuality between humans and the rest of God's creation in giving and receiving God's love characterizes the heart of the collective impasse, I think. In her fine book, Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmerer, a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation and a field biologist, recounts an exchange with her graduate students in a course at the State University of New York. She invited them to articulate what they appreciate about nature, and they had much to say, at least initially. And here I quote from her book. "They professed without reservation that they love the earth. And then I asked them, 'Do you think that the earth loves you back?' No one was willing to answer that. It was as if I had brought a 2-headed porcupine into the classroom. Unexpected, prickly. They backed away slowly. Here was a room full of writers, passionately wallowing in unrequited love of nature. So I made it hypothetical and asked, what do you suppose would happen if people believed this crazy notion that the earth loved them back? The floodgates opened. They all wanted to talk at once. We were suddenly off the deep end, heading for world peace and perfect harmony. One student summed it up. You wouldn't harm what gives you love. Knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond," unquote. Allowing the land to shape communal identity deepens contemplative awareness of human sacred, inseparable bond with all creation. Daniel Scheid has written potently of the cosmic common good, in which humans perceive ourselves as, quote, participants in a cosmic evolutionary development, as embedded in webs of ecological dependencies, as members of the ecosystems in which we live, as citizens of a greater earthly and cosmic commons, as siblings in a universal family, unquote. Facing into the climate crisis, it is precisely through allowing God's love to draw us into mutual love relationships with all other members of God's creation that humans can grow authentically into who we were created to be, interdependent, vulnerable to the wounds of God's love, and responsive to the needs of the cosmic common good. And here I think of Yuri's invitation to remember bearing the cost. What does it look like to bear the cost as we recognize our place in the cosmic common good? To realize that we would not harm what gives us love, human self-interest requires purification. For where there is true love of God, John of the Cross writes, love of self and of one's own things find no entry, unquote. By renouncing selfishness and allowing ourselves to be loved in return by the rest of God's creation, we humans might then resist harming what gives us love. This path of surrender unfolds by way of humble contrition, as we see in Psalm 51, and as we will hear much of during the coming week in the Christian tradition, celebrating the Triduum. Understanding humility as central to ecological conversion, Pope Francis asks in Laudato Si, quote, "What need does the earth have of us?" Unquote. His question turns anthropocentrism on its head, recognizing the human need to learn from the rest of God's creation about the inexhaustible depth of God's love, not just for humanity, but finally and totally for all creation. As an ecological virtue, humility grounds and deepens contemplative awareness. The state of humility, André Loof writes, is the state of abasement, the condition in which one finds oneself flatly on the ground. It is precisely when we have been leveled with hearts broken that the grace of God's love can break through to draw us closer to God. Humility and humiliation meet, encouraging interior surrender, as happens in the contemplative dark night. In our current context, after a year of pandemic, in the midst of climate crisis, both signs of planetary impasse, we don't have to search far for evidence of brokenheartedness. May this become the ground of humble openness and surrender to God's love, that we humans might truly relate to the rest of God's creation as signs of God's passionate love, and finally allow the earth to love us back, understanding at last that we are all interconnected. Thank you.
Thank you, Margie, for your powerful reflections, especially on conceptions of the dark night of the soul, contemplation, humility. Those are all very relevant as we face the climate crisis that's unfolding today. And especially the phrase too, you wouldn't love what gives you harm. I think that you wouldn't, you wouldn't harm what gives you love. Sorry. I think that that's very relevant, especially today. Our final panelist, last but not least, is Father Emmanuel Katongole. Father Emmanuel, if I can turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Kelly, for the invitation. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this wonderful, wonderful panel. I'm really indebted to Maggie, to Rabbi Jonathan and Yuri for your remarks, and thank you very much for the wonderful teaching. In the few minutes that have been allotted to me, I want to do three things. First of all, share some images that were revealed to me, confirmed a number of things about the urgency and the breadth of the ecological challenge, especially in Africa and in Uganda, where we're doing some work. And secondly, I want to share something about the work that we are doing at Bethany Land Institute, and then conclude with a few reflections from Wendell Berry. Reflections that have been crucial and that have in a way shaped my own thinking and work around the issue of justice for the earth. First of all, in terms of COVID-19, the time of the lockdown, how much of that was really a kairos time, a time that revealed so much of our social vulnerabilities, but also that revealed and confirmed the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor belonging together. And for me, that it will continue to reveal and affirm the magnitude of that problem, especially in Africa, in Uganda. And this is these are some of the images. So for images, during lockdown, I was in Uganda throughout the lockdown, and for clear images. The first one, this image is about the food distribution in the slums of Kampala. And the government decided to distribute food, and they started distributing food. All of a sudden, they ran out of food. They have so many challenges, and finally they realized that there are more people in the slums of Kampala than we actually thought. And so people crying of hunger, but the government underestimated the number of people. And then finally they said, and some people actually are not reachable. You cannot reach them because there are no roads. That kind of really confirmed the plight of many people in Africa, in Uganda, where slums are growing at such an alarming rate. By 2015, 30% of Africa's population, over 350 million people, were living in slums. The projection is by 2050, 80% of Africa's population, that is over 1.5 billion people, will be living in environments like this, raising deep questions about human dignity, about who am I, unemployment, and all that. So that's the first image that was revealed during the COVID crisis. The second image during COVID crisis, if I can get this to move. Sorry about that. Yeah, it was a very dry season, very dry weather that brought a lot of locusts from the east, from Kenya, Uganda, and devastated fields for many farmers. So many farmers are going actually hungry. Their fields devastated, showing the kind of the warming. Going hand in hand, actually, shortly after the very extreme temperatures, we got a lot of rain in many places that flooded so many businesses, so many homes, because of the destruction of the wetlands, the destruction of the forests. And so these kind of extreme weather conditions, again, revealing the extent of the climate challenge. And finally, the other image was image of Kampala. During the lockdown, because there was no pollution, there was no traffic, the particulate matter in Kampala improved, dropped by 4%. So the air quality significantly improved. It's usually a very polluted city, but the similar experience was reported from around the world in a number of other cities. The residents in Delhi were for the first time able to see the Himalayas that were 120 miles away, which was also true of Nairobi. The residents were able to see Mount Kenya, the top of Mount Kenya, which is 90 miles away. Residents in China and Wuhan were able to see and hear birds for the first time. For me, this was really a reminder of how much the earth needs to experience more and more of such a Sabbath, such a healing, where the earth itself could breathe. All these images coming out of the COVID lockdown confirmed a number of insights for me from Pope Francis's Laudato Si, the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor belonging together, the need for an integral ecology, an integrated approach that fights poverty, that takes care of creation and restores human dignity, but also that this cannot just be achieved through a technological framework. It requires a mindset change. And so Pope Francis calls for a distinctive way of looking at things, a way of thinking, a lifestyle, a spirituality. This in many ways confirmed the work that we had already started to do at Bethany Land Institute. Actually, in 2015, when we read Laudato Si, we decided that actually the initiative that we are thinking of needs to really be about enacting that distinctive way of looking at things, a way of thinking, a lifestyle, and a spirituality. The short of the story for Bethany Land Institute is that in 2012, 3 of us priests from Kampala got together as a way to celebrate our 25th anniversary and wanted to do something. I was more concerned about the ecological devastation, especially the destruction of the forest. And so I wanted to plant a forest. My other colleague reminded me the need for education, the mindset change. And then another colleague encouraged us to also to think about economics. And so I integrate together the 3 E's, ecology, economics, and education. We are not very sure what exactly this initiative would look like until 2015. By reading Laudato Si, it became very clear that is exactly what we needed to do. So the enacting of this Laudato Si. And so we started working on that and building a campus. This is the BLI campus at Nandele, where we have over 200 acres of land in partnership with the Diocese of Casanaluero, where we are working with the rural community, the young people, forming them in this kind of spirituality, distinctive way of thinking, mindset that Pope Francis calls for. And we call the young people that we are working with, we call them caretakers. Really inspired, influenced by the invitation in scripture, especially Genesis chapter 2, chapter 2, verse 15. God himself working the land, planting a garden, first of all, forming human beings out of the earth, planting a garden, and really putting human beings in the garden with an invitation to till and care for the earth. And so we use this notion of caretakers for the young people that we are working with in order to capture that sense of tilling and caretaking, which is the same notion for serving. So to till the earth and care for it is about serving creation. It's about protecting creation. It's about caring for creation. It's about healing. It's about nurturing. It's about cultivating, not only cultivating the earth, but also cultivating that spirituality, that distinctive way of looking at things and lifestyle. So our young men and women, the caretakers, work in 3 programs. Here you see an image of the caretakers after their day in the field in the evening. One is Mary's Farm, which is a sustainable agricultural community of farming, really tilling the land, taking care of the land in sustainable ways, and producing food at the same time. Then there is the whole question of reforestation. We call that Lazarus trees, after the story of Lazarus, who was sick, who died, but was brought back to life, talking about the ecological renewal. And so there is a huge forest that we are conserving at Bethany Land Institute, over 180 acres of natural forest that has been totally really, encroached on and almost reduced to 60 acres, but we want to grow it back to its original size of 180 acres. So really replanting the forest, conserving the forest. Last year alone, we planted over 28,000 trees, native trees, and also working with the local community in terms of reforestation. And then, yeah, it's one of Notre Dame students that working with the BLI caretaker in that. And then there is the Martha's Market, which is the kind of the entrepreneurship, the economic dimension, where caretakers do their crops, take care of their animals for sale, in order to kind of make income for themselves. Here we see the caretakers kind of really going around the campus. Just wanted to show you an image of the caretakers, but working in these 3 programs of Mary's Farm, of Lazarus Forest, and Martha's Market, responding to that invitation to till the earth and care for it. So that's what is going on at BLI, Bethany Land Institute, this initiative that started with a dream for the 3 of us, kind of bring together the 3 E's. In all of this, we are very much influenced by Pope Francis, but also insights from Wendell Berry have been very significant in this journey. So I want to end by just kind of a few reflections from Wendell Berry, especially in one of his articles that I love, Out of Your Car, Off Your Horse. And he makes a number of insights in that essay. The first one, Wendell Berry says that in order to make ecological good sense for the planet, you must make ecological good sense locally. If you want to keep your local acts from destroying the globe, you must think locally. The significance of acting and thinking locally in a concrete local place way. And for Wendell Berry, such a thinking is not simply a kind of a mental exercise, an abstract way of thinking. It is a form of engagement. an engagement, according to Wendell Berry, that grows out of and deepens affection. Affection for the earth, affection for the poor, affection for a particular place, very concrete place. And thirdly, Wendell Berry says that the real work of planet saving will be small, humble, and humbling. And yet, in so far as it is infused with love, it will be immensely pleasing and rewarding. This is one of the things that I've learned through the BLI, working with a very concrete, small community of people. On one hand, it seems so small, given the immensity of the ecological challenge and problem. Yet, if we listen to the wisdom of Wendell Berry, he says the real work of planet saving will always be small, humble, and humbling, and yet, in so far as it is infused with love, pleasing, and extremely rewarding. Accordingly, the quest for justice for the earth, which cannot be separated from the question of justice for the poor, is an invitation into concrete forms of caretaking, into concrete forms of engagement that serve, that protect, that care for the health of the earth, that cultivate the earth. Concrete local forms of engagement that care, that nurture, that protect, that advance the well-being of the earth. That, I think, is what Justice for the Earth looks like. Very, very concrete, very, very mundane, small, humble, humbling, and yet extremely rewarding. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father Emmanuel, especially for returning us to the themes of humility and also for the ideas that action in the climate crisis is about service and it's about cultivation, which are two aspects that we see at work at the Bethany Land Institute. So thank you very much for those reflections. We now have a little over 10 minutes for some questions and answers. Again, I would encourage anybody watching who has any questions for a specific panelist or a general question to input your question down at the Q&A box. I have one question that I'd like to open up to the three of you to begin, and that has to do with these themes of humility and smallness that have kind of just weave themselves throughout all of our reflections, and also the call for action. So maybe beginning, we can go in order with Yuri, Margie, and then Father Emmanuel, of what it means to embody a contemplation and this idea of smallness in our own lives for changing how we view the climate crisis, but then also how can we adopt smaller actions into our life so that we can actually make it a practical difference instead of just talking or reflecting. Yuri, if I could turn that over to you.
Well, yeah, I think, yeah, this is exactly what we try to do with time. I mean, we try to give every person in the world, you know, a place where they can act, and by acting, they also should feel good about what they're doing, and to give for example, my son, he gave, you know, we have on the age of 13, we have a bar mitzvah. It's a big ceremony. Usually they get lots of money, lots of things, lots of presents. And he gave much of this, and the money he received, he actually gave to time because he felt, I mean, we didn't ask him for that. And he just saw how important it is. And he continues on a monthly basis. He can continue to contribute to give from his weekly allowance or for other monies he continued to give, and I know it comes. He could do other things with that, with this money. So I think, but it's not only money, of course. It could be other things that are really important for you, but you have to really give, and by that you not only feel good about yourself, you're also showing everyone that you really care. So this is what I think.
Thank you. Margie?
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. That's a wonderful question. And I think first of a class that I've been part of for the last 5 years across the 3 campuses here in South Bend of Notre Dame and St. Mary's College and Holy Cross College. All 3 are run by branches, the Priest Brothers and Sisters of Holy Cross, and share the same charism, therefore, of the order. And we invite our students to engage in this rhythm of contemplation and action by adopting some sort of contemplative practice for the semester. And also, we start the course by taking landscape tours on each campus, and in non-pandemic times, we go off campus as well. And just to come into relationship with the rest of creation around us, even in a more urban context, I think is so important for every one of us to wake up our senses as human beings and understand our interconnection, that we just won't survive as humans without the rest of creation around us. And I think when humans begin to realize that, it makes it easier to scale down. And speaking as a US North American, I think that that is one of the chief challenges in our dominant culture, to scale down, slow down and scale down. And this pandemic time has offered many opportunities to do that, and to create different habits. So I'm very hopeful that we can continue to do that.
Thank you, Margie. Father Manuel?
I think Maggie has said everything that I wanted to say about this question. But when I think about the answer to the question they raised, I think about 2 words: conversion. Pope Francis calls us to an ecological conversion, which is really an invitation into a sense of seeing our deep connection with the earth, a sense of belonging, that we are part of creation. And I also think about affection. When Roberto talks about affection for the earth, affection for the poor, affection for a place, very concrete. So I think about everyday practices that kind of reflect that kind of conversion, whether it is in terms of our consumerism, cutting down really on what we consume. I think about speed and learning speed. Take a kind of a slower pace so that we can notice things around us, people around us, so that we can also listen to ourselves, what is going on in our own lives. And then kind of really making effort to connect, especially those at the margins, in whatever simple way that we can connect with those at the margins. Yeah, I think about those, the kind of the habits and the practices that cultivate that conversion and that cultivate that affection.
Great, thank you. We have one question from a participant, in which case I think she's coming from the perspective of a college student, where slowing down can often be a challenge. And she asks, as a college student, how can we further our education about ecology, spirituality, and religion? And with all 3 of you having students, this might be a good question for all 3 of you as well.
Well, I'll begin. I'm trying to see my students, getting more involved. I mean, by becoming involved, whether you form a chapter of an organization or whether you do things yourself or you get your fellow students to act on something, you learn so much just by acting. You get to know. I used to say that if I want to, I mean, it's not my saying, I think, if really I want to know something about something, I go and teach it. But it's also by acting, by really going and acting on something, you learn a lot, and a whole new world will open for you. This is my perspective.
Thank you, Yuri.
Yeah, I would say definitely involvement. I was going to say involvement, involving oneself in something. I think it's a good way. So if we can invite our students to get involved in whatever initiative and so forth, that invitation itself is, I think, a great learning process, but also a great way of really transforming our own hearts. Anyway. But I was also thinking that, as Pope Francis says, the kind of the specialization of modern times, whether it is in the market or in the classroom or in education in terms of departments, does not allow us to see the big picture. So the greatest challenge I feel in terms of education is that we are so much kind of used to the kind of siloed form of education in kind of departments and so forth. That is very good, that allow us to go deep and specialize, but usually it does not allow us to see the big picture. Justice for the earth, requires us to really think in terms of the big picture. And so kind of encouraging cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, or beyond boundaries, I think it is kind of almost inviting us into designing and thinking about education in new ways that involve, for example, economics, politics, culture, history, not in the traditional kind of siloed sort of ways. And I don't know how that will happen, but I'm also depending on the students to push us, but also to teach us how to do that. And I think it will be surprising how much we can learn from the students themselves.
I'll just also add that I think it's really important for students and every person to take contemplative time, actually to give ourselves time for silence in nature and to really listen for that of God, in order for us to try to realize our interconnection. So thinking that what you just said, Emmanuel, about academic silos, I think there may be an analog in terms of how humans relate to the rest of creation, that we're very tempted to segment our lives. And especially with modern media, I think there can be a temptation to distraction and fragmentation. But when we really allow ourselves to be quiet in nature, the Japanese have a practice called forest bathing. And I've never been to Japan, but I just think it's a wonderful spiritual practice in which humans can allow ourselves to rest in God's creation and celebrate it as God's, not as ours, but as God's. And allowing more time for those sorts of practices is really important in answer to that question: how do we connect ecology and spirituality and religion? I think we are all students in that, and we will be through the course of our lifetimes.
Thank you, Margie. We have just a few minutes left of this panel. We have one additional question from our participant who asks that if capitalism encourages us to commodify everything, including human labor, what are concrete ways to counteract that in everyday life? And this isn't a question that I'll direct to all three of you, but if anybody has any insight on how we fight against this culture of capitalism and market values that tend to creep into our daily life and how we treat the earth. Does anybody care to respond?
Well, Emmanuel, you have mentioned your love of Wendell Berry's work, and I also am a huge fan of Wendell Berry, and I think he has a lot to say on this topic. But not to sound like a broken record, but I think one way is for us to put down our devices and to get outdoors and recognize our interrelationships, so that we realize that there is more than what humans can make and sell, that there is an inestimable value built into God's creation that we're part of, but we're not the only part, and that it's priceless. Your project of recognizing areas of the world that are particularly vulnerable to destruction, and then inviting people to save them is, I think, a wonderful way to turn commodification on its head, to say, no, we can take action to safeguard these precious parts of creation. And that's part of what it means to be a caretaker, as you all are doing at the Bethany Land Institute, Emmanuel.
Margie, those are powerful last words. We're so grateful. I'm sorry this time has gone so much quicker than we were hoping with our other amazing questions that we have left over. But I just wanted to, before we conclude, I have one announcement. First, I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and a special thanks to Yuri, Rabbi Yonatan, Margie, and Father Emmanuel for gifting us with your perspectives and expertise, as well as Bill Purcell and Paula Muller for all of your work organizing this conference, and then also for our team at Notre Dame Studios for making this possible. For everybody interested as well, Margie File here today will host a Holy Saturday virtual retreat titled The Cry of the Earth, The Cry of the Poor, next Saturday, April 3rd from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. You can find more information about the retreat and a link to register on the Center for Social Concerns website. And again, thank you all for your participation. We wish you a very restful weekend. And for everyone who observes, we wish you a blessed start to Passover and Holy Week. So thank you everybody for joining us today. And thank you for a beautiful conference.
Thank you. Bye-bye.